I'm Jen Taylor Skinner, and this is the Electorette. On this episode, I have a conversation with Nguyen, the executive director of Run AAPI. It's an organization that's dedicated to retaking the cultural narratives of the Asian American community. We've just passed the one-year anniversary of the deadly shooting in Atlanta that killed 6 Asian American women. And since then, there have been several other vicious attacks against members of the AAPI community in just the last year. Lynn joins me to discuss this increasing violence and what should be done to stop it. We also discuss how Run AAPI is not only working to retake the cultural narrative for the Asian American community, but also how to best embolden and empower young Asian Americans to vote and strengthen their representation at the ballot box. So, please enjoy my conversation with Linh Nguyen of Run AAPI. Linh Nguyen, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jen.
So we just passed the one-year anniversary of the spa shootings in Atlanta, right? And 8 people were killed. And I shouldn't actually say it that way. Someone went in and killed 8 people, right? Mm-hmm. And the hate crimes have been on the rise for years now. There's been a steep trajectory up. And I understand you were in Georgia at the time. Like, how did it shape the community then? And what's happened since then?
Yeah, I mean, it's still very hard to talk about, Jen. I mean, it's so important that we do remember what happened. And thank you for being very intentional with explaining how it happened, right? Because this was every single move that shooter had made was very intentional. And we knew that. We knew exactly what was happening. But I had a chance to work so intimately with the Asian American community in Georgia. And that was specifically to mobilize, to understand, to do the outreach, and to make sure that they understood their place in the election last year, not just for the 2020 election, but again, for the 2 very important, U.S. Senate seats that eventually we got Ossoff and Warnock into office. But the Asian American community, they played such a critical role in that. And so to go from that moment of us recognizing their political influence, their political power, where they are and who they are in Georgia, to such a horrific moment, a little over a year ago, I think it's like such a broad range of emotions, like if I'm being honest, Jen, in that I think a lot of us can't believe that, holy shit, it's already been a year. But then at the same time, there's just so much that we haven't even addressed, right? And we see this in New York City. We've seen this in other parts of the country and you're right. I think it's hard to say because either these incidents are actually going up or they're just being reported at a higher rate, and we're finally classifying it and naming it for what it is. Which is the other bigger thing. We've always dealt with this, whether it's the Asian community, the Black community, Latino community, but to name it what it is as a hate crime against our own people, that is relatively new in our space. I mean, despite all that, you're right. This has probably been some of the toughest couple of years that a lot of us who are doing this on the ground advocacy work and organizing, it's just been very traumatic. And it happens over and over again.
Yeah.
And we need to see more. We just need to see more action, if I can be honest.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about that time and thinking about, all the conversations I've heard, since then and before then about the connection to all of the political rhetoric, right? And is the connection to the data and the trajectory of the violence. But, now talking to you, I'm thinking does it matter? Hate crimes are hate crimes,
yes.
Whether there's 1 or there are 1,000 a day. That one does not need to happen. And the rhetoric that we heard in the campaign, in the 2016 campaign and
right.
after that should not happen, right?
But it did. It did. And this was actually something that, again, and when we get to it, but even with former President Trump, he just normalized, anytime he was on TV, anytime he had the mic, anything he chose to say was just so hateful. There were so many moments throughout his presidency where, again, whether it was the start of the pandemic, whether it was specifically targeting Chinese Americans, but that for us, again, this type of, I don't even know how to say it. It's we're visible, but we're not visible. And that makes sense. I mean, we've been stereotyped in so many different ways that I think what people haven't yet connected is that this has been happening for years and for decades and for centuries. We have political figures like our former president who just brought this to a whole other extreme, that allows for people again, the shooter that had happened in Atlanta, for this to happen. This just can't be our norm. And yet it really is for so many people. And it's just now so heightened to another level for the Asian American community where, I'm here in Houston, Texas, Jen, and I can't help but to think of my parents, can't help but to think of my relatives, my older relatives who just can't live their day-to-day lives like they used to. And that's just a reality for so many of us.
Yeah, I was thinking about when he started this, and it
Yeah.
actually started before the 2016 campaign. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about him, but I think it goes to your point about kind of oversimplification of identity. He
Yes.
would always refer to the Asian American community as Chinese, which is like, can we
Yes.
be dumber than that? Sorry.
Hmm.
It's just like, first of all, the Asian American community in this country is broad and vast, right?
Hmm.
But I think he was
Yes.
trying to appeal to a certain, kind of ignorance about the community. And that made me think
Absolutely.
about like Run AAPI, the organization that you're here to talk
Hmm.
about.
Yep.
You put out an ad in, I think it was 2020, and it may have
Hmm.
been when you launched, but that ad was so moving. And I'm trying to recall what was in it. And I think it went viral online. But there was this montage of people, right? And you had
Yes.
a
Yes.
montage
Yes.
of celebrities too. And let me go back to my
Hmm.
notes here because I wrote down all of the celebrities that were in it.
No, but you're spot on, Jen. That's exactly it.
Yeah, and so there was Mindy Kaling and Chloe
Hmm.
Bennett
Hmm.
and Jason Momoa, and I was just like,
Hmm. Hmm.
that is not the picture that's been given in kind of our culture politically, right? And
Right.
socially, it's just
Right.
so broad. I mean, I think that politically, just the broadness and the breadth and the depth of the community has kind of been ignored.
Yes. Yes. That is so spot on, Jen. And again, that video, that was part of the campaign that Run AAPI that we kicked off for 2020. And like specifically saying that the whole like Asian American, Pacific Islander, Native and Hawaiian umbrella is just so complex. It is so complicated and it is so nuanced all across this country that, again, for years and for decades, we have just been oversimplified. And what was the whole purpose of that video again was to show the whole breadth and the whole depth of who we are, and like specifically like for Run API, like we work with young Asian Americans across this country, and again, who we are as a demographic, who we are as a community, who we are as like a very critical voting bloc for either party. There's still so much to be said in that work alone. There is. And that's why, so what we did last year, Jen, this was late 2021. And again, like despite the rise in anti-Asian violence, the rise in hate crimes, or at least the rise in media coverage, and I don't know about you, Jen, but like my social media feed, that was all that I was seeing, right? Throughout the pandemic, that we took the time to just go back and just talk to young Asians, right? To just like get a temperature check of where things are at. Because we knew, and like y'all know this, but we know that as we get closer to a really big election year, that's when all the politicians, the campaigns, the policymakers, they start paying attention to us all over again, because like we know why, but they need our vote. But for us, it was again demanding that not only do we need to be seen, not only do we need to be heard, but like y'all really need to get to know who we are. And so, like, one thing I wanted to share with you, and again, we talked to thousands of young Asians all across the country, 18 to 35. We had every single region of this country mapped out along this polling that we were doing. And that despite, this is like the shitty thing, but despite, our growing numbers, despite our like record breaking turnout in votes every single year in multiple states across the country. Georgia is such a good example, Jen, in our voter turnout, which was historical in 2020. And then again in 2021, of the respondents that we talked to, 68% of young Asians have not been asked by a political campaign on either side to get involved.
Wow. Wow.
Yes, 68%. And this is what we have been saying for years, in that one, Asian Americans, the entire umbrella of Asian Americans across this country, we've been here, we've been political, we've been active in our own communities, and we give a shit. Like we have such a powerful voice in our range of concerns and the issues that we want to fight for. We've always been here, but it is on our political campaigns, it is on our candidates to actually make that effort. Like, we talk a big game on showing up where people are at, showing up where communities are, and yet we have no understanding of why 68% of young Asian Americans have never been asked to get involved. That's shocking.
Yeah, that is shocking. That's like that's a lot. 68%, that's pretty high. I
Yeah.
mean, so what did you learn? Was this a formal survey, or what did you learn
Mhm.
from talking to these young people on the ground?
Yeah, this was a formal survey, Jen. I mean, we both had very open-ended questions, right? Like we wanted our participants to feel like super, super comfortable and open, like offering like their darkest and most like unfiltered thoughts, which is what we got. And man, this has like been the dynamics for a very long time. So a couple other things I wanted to share with you in that. And again, like thinking through like what we have been through as a community in the last couple of years, whether it's been through the pandemic, whether it's been through the hate crimes, in that we still had 87% of our respondents still feeling so proud to be Asian American. And yet 50%, only half of the respondents, they had no strong sense of community within the AAPI umbrella. Within the Asian American Pacific Islander umbrella, 50% said they don't feel a strong sense of community there.
Wow.
And again, these are young Asians who, again, are growing in population. We are growing. It's like 24 million plus Asian Americans across this country. That population will continue to grow. That voting electorate is going to continue to grow. And yet, what's equally challenging is that even within our own community, a lot of young Asians still don't feel a sense of belonging within their own people. One other thing I wanted to add to that was that, again, in thinking through like identity and who we are as young Asians, who we are politically, in that 52% of young Asian Americans still believe in achieving the American dream. And whatever that means for young Asians, whatever their idea and their sense and their slice of the American dream is, only 52% still believed it was achievable for them.
Yeah. Do you know what that means, though? I mean, how was that question posed? Because I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, because, there isn't a
Yeah,
clear
yeah,
idea of what
it's
the
very
American dream
open.
means anymore.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's our exact point in that question alone, that demonstrated such a vast and broad and very complicated community. And so there was like, oh my goodness, it was like such a vast range because we had a couple follow-up questions to that, Jen, in that, like, for example, we had one Southeast Asian individual. I believe he was in his late 20s, currently living in Northern Virginia, who described his understanding of the American dream is that he needed to preserve his family's cultures, his family's traditions, and like specifically through food and the dishes that his mom taught him to make. That was his understanding of the American dream. And that was something he was so particular with in explaining to us that was something he had to fight to preserve. Again, living in Northern Virginia. We had another gentleman in New York City. He was a little younger, I think mid-20s, East Asian, living in Chinatown, New York City. And his understanding of the American dream was to make money.
Wow.
And that was a very quick answer. That one, he believed that his part of his Americanness was to make money and like build on like the entrepreneurial spirit of what it means to be American, right? And yet these are two individuals who also identified as Democrats.
Wow.
Yes. And so the research that we've been doing, the time that we took to go back into the field and just like talk to people again, right? I think like we kind of forgot how to do that in politics, just like talking to people without having to make it feel so transactional that we're asking for something, asking for their support. But we really just wanted to get a good sense because the research that we're releasing, which we just released a couple of days ago, our whole purpose is that we need to disrupt this conventional understanding of who young Asians are, and specifically in the political space.
Were you able to get a sense of why they felt no connection to the broader Asian American
Mm.
community? I mean, that's a hard one, I would imagine.
Oh man, it's a hard one. I think, in my opinion, Janet, and a little bit of our research did touch on this, is that there is just so much more to say when it comes to political, but also cultural figures that are well respected in our community, are well known in our community. And we asked that question straight up, like, can you name a political or cultural figure that you look up to? And we try to keep that question so broad, so open, and yet it was 43%, so just a little under half of the thousands of individuals we talked to couldn't even name one. Couldn't even name one Asian political or cultural figure that they look up to, that they are inspired by. I think right under that mark, I think it was like close to like 20% or so named Andrew Yang.
Oh.
And then it wasn't, yeah. And I have like a lot of thoughts on that. So won't even start. I won't even start on that. But and then we get into individuals like our Vice President Kamala Harris, who is half South Asian. She was in the single digits. We had athletes like Naomi Osaka, again in the single digits. Jeremy Lin, I think, again, not as not as well known with our younger generation, but was still listed a couple times, but for the most part, a lot of young Asians could not name anyone from our community that they are inspired by. And I think that's like part of the issue. Like 76% of young Asians don't feel like they're actually represented in any kind of political life, right? And so I think there's something to be said on representation, and I think we're starting to see a major shift, whether it's in media, whether it's in entertainment specifically. Like, I don't know if you recently saw, Jen, but there was a Disney and Pixar movie, Turning Red, that was just released a few weeks ago. But you're starting to see these movies that are, made by an all Asian American woman cast, are largely reflecting the Asian diaspora. Our stories are starting to be told on screen. And like, it's like the little stuff like that that just makes the biggest difference, And like, I remember, I think this was last year, Jen. I don't know if you remember this movie, Raya and the Last Dragon, again, was another Disney movie, right?
Yeah.
And there was just like one scene, it was near the beginning, and it was like a very, very specific soup dish that she was cooking with her dad. And I can't even tell y'all how much, like, the spices that were being used, the specific pot that was being used on the stove, like, that was the shit that we grew up with,
Oh,
and that just hit so close to home. And it's like, it's moments like that
yeah.
that we need to continue to see in every different industry. And I think that is where like the cultural shift will start.
Yeah. At least we can extrapolate that Disney's doing something right. But our elected officials,
Mm. Oh, girl.
yeah, that's a whole other issue. I mean, so do you have the numbers as to how we're doing with parity and representation in elected positions, right? Because I would imagine that it's very low.
Mm. It is. It is. Yeah, I can speak more anecdotally. I mean, I'm here in Texas, and if anyone has been in Texas, like specifically Houston, we have one of the largest Chinatowns that I have ever
Wow.
experienced. And by large, I mean like geographically, it is so expansive that we have like a little Saigon. We have different pockets specifically for the Korean community. Same thing with the South Asian community is well represented within Chinatown. And that even with a state like Texas, which is so broad and it has such a large and growing Asian American population in the state, here in Houston and in Dallas, our state house delegation, when it comes to those who are elected officials who are actually of Asian descent, it is still in the single digits. I think at this time, Jen, I think there is only, I'm going to get in shit if I don't get this right because this is my home state, but I think there is only 4 or 5, again, that self identifies Asian who represent our communities here in the state of Texas. And it's almost the same thing in Georgia, an incredibly small Asian American Pacific Islander caucus. And yet, what's so concerning is that our electorate here in either one of these states are growing in population. We're only going to get much bigger. We're only going to see more eligible and more naturalized citizens here in a number of these states. And I think what's also interesting when it comes to all of like these first time Asian American elected officials, where they're at, and actually reflecting where the population is. But I just hope that people don't forget of us in southern states, whether it is Georgia, whether it is North Carolina, whether it is here in Texas, but we are growing in numbers in like the most interesting places across America. And like the last thing I wanted to say on that, Jen, because I think it's really important, but the newly elected mayor in Boston, who I thought just ran such a beautiful campaign. And of course, like leave it to Asian American women, but Mayor Michelle Wu, I think that was one of the first campaigns I saw that won. Like if you look at her team, Jen, her team was made up of young Asian women. Her campaign manager, her digital director,
Wow.
organizers on the ground. I think that makes the biggest difference when you can reflect who you are and the people that you hire and the values that you live are also the values of your team. That shit makes the biggest difference on the ground. It does. Like I was raised as an organizer. And so I'm just such a big believer that we have to take these chances, when it comes to diversifying our political teams and who's actually representing the candidate on the ground. That makes the biggest difference. And Michelle just ran. And it wasn't just a campaign on the issues. And yeah, like, there are moments when she had to lean into her identity. There are moments when she had to understand the complicated dynamics of a city like Boston. But she like did our community proud. And she got the national support.
Yeah.
She got that attention because she just honored who she was as a woman, as a first time mayoral candidate, as someone who, understood the challenges of being undermined as an Asian American woman. And she just broke the status quo. And I got so much
Yeah.
respect for that.
Yeah. That surprises me what you told me about Texas. I would not have guessed
Hmm.
that they had such a large, Chinatown there.
Yes. Yep. People don't really know
Yeah,
this.
they don't know. And I think that's what was so
Um,
surprising about the results in Georgia too. Like
yes.
you don't think of the South,
Right. Right.
in
Right.
that way,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So what's your aim with, talking to younger people in a political sense? Is your aim to encourage them to maybe run for office?
Oh, that would, oh my gosh, if we could think of that kind of pipeline, absolutely, absolutely. But if I'm like being honest, Jen, I mean, I think at least with this study, this polling that we did, as recently as late last year, I think it actually told us a much bigger challenge. And that, as much as we are going to continue turning out in numbers, as much as young Asians are going to continue to vote and exercise their right to vote, I think there's still so much more that needs to be done when it comes to actually just reclaiming who we are. And unfortunately, it's going to have to take just like an army of young Asians who are comfortable, who feel safe in doing that to be able to tell their own narrative, right? Because others have told us who we are for way too long. But I think now is we're starting to see again, like the whole swath of different Asians, who we are, where we came from, the way that we are honoring our ancestors. But I think right now it's going to be a critical year of storytelling, if I'm being honest, and especially in a year like 2022, when yes, like there are a lot of critical elections that are happening this year, but I think also equally important is that if we even want to even start thinking about the presidency in 2024, if we want to maintain that Democratic White House, that work and investment has to be done now. It does. Because like you and I know this, Jen. I mean, it just says something when we have candidates and campaigns coming in super hot last couple months before election day, all of a sudden letting us know that we're so important, we need their support. It's that kind of relationship building. It takes time. What we're doing here at Run AAPI is that one, there are not many organizations across this country in a number of different states where they are just hyper focused on young Asians, right? Like when we talk on voter engagement within the larger AAPI umbrella, Asian American Pacific Islander umbrella, oftentimes we actually forget this very critical demographic of younger Asians because they are very progressive. They are very outspoken. The issues that they will fight for, we don't talk enough of. And whether it is more driven by the racial and social injustice issues, one of the top rated issues, Jen, when we ask them, like, what y'all like care about? But one of the top rated issues was the fight on our climate crisis.
Wow. Okay.
And like, yeah, and like when we think of, the whole landscape of environmental injustice groups and who's at the table, who's speaking on these issues, you don't typically see people of color. And you definitely do not see young Asians speaking on how much this type of concern reaches so deep within our own. So and that's what we've been trying to demonstrate is again like the depth that we bring, that we aren't just like that stereotype that y'all probably think we are, and like this, Jen, but like on the ground, like we're kind of tired of like these like boba events. Like we don't really care if your candidate drinks boba. Like, we're like so much more than that.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of insulting. Does that happen?
Yes. Oh my gosh, Jen. I can't even tell you. It's and again, it's like the standard outreach in a box. Like, okay, if a Chinatown is in our, and I've seen this in Las Vegas too, which again is a very active place for our community and specifically for the Filipino community in Las Vegas. They are very politically plugged in. It's like some of the most interesting and exciting organizing I've ever done in my life has been in Las Vegas. But I can't even tell you, Jen, how many boba events I've been invited to. Like we
Oh.
just gotta do better than that, okay? Like think we deserve better than that.
So what about you do? We all do. Jesus. Okay. So
Yes, we all
what
do.
about legislatively, right? Kind of going
Mm,
back
mhm, mhm.
to the first question because it's really hard to see this stuff on the news
Right.
and then kind of thinking like, what can we do about this, right? Like
Mm.
is there anything legislatively we can do? Like what about the legislative priorities?
I think this is gonna be the greatest challenge. And again, I think this really does reflect within the API umbrella, the differences, the generational differences, the ethnic differences when it comes to whether it's East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian. There are so many challenging values that exist within that space alone. And, and we brought up that question, like, what policy changes do we need to see? And we asked that within our young Asian Americans that we were talking to last year, and that there is an equal amount of support when it comes to harsher punishment, when it comes to needing to fund the police so they can do, and again, this is me paraphrasing, but when it comes to funding the police to do their jobs, we need greater surveillance in our communities. We don't feel safe in our neighborhoods. And by safety, they're equating it to being sure that our police department and our task force, whatever, however you want to name it, is well equipped or is well resourced. And then there's another side of the community, and I hear this a lot more within my colleagues in Georgia, in that we have to reimagine safety and what public safety means for us, for our community, for Asian American women, for women in general, or for our elders, in that it's not so much a cry for, again, for ensuring that our police departments are well resourced, but it's little things. And I've been actually seeing this more in San Francisco and in the Chinatown and in the Bay Area, but making sure that, if in the case something does happen, that our elders specifically will know how to report this, right? We'll know that in like 12 different languages, you can actually dial a number in your own language and make sure that you are seeking this help. Right. And I wanted to give that and like to bring context to this, because we know this, in that legislative process, yes, is one thing. Yes, is part of our system and our structure that we need to see. But we all know how slow it moves and the public support it needs to move forward. We all know it is a political game. And so what I've been seeing instead on the other side of this, and whether they are young Asians, whether they are our elders, I'm seeing like a whole different range of different generations, but people have been taking it in their own hands, and it's been a lot of these organizations, it's been a lot of these community activists that have actually provided a greater sense of safety than I have seen on our legislative side. And I just got to name that, because I know we had a pretty critical anti-Asian hate bill pass. It was a very big deal within our Congress members, and I'll be honest with that, Jen, in that I feel I'm like 50-50 on it. There were, I think, over 200 Asian American organizations that actually opposed that bill and signed on to the opposition of that bill, right? Because again, in practice, what that bill was going to do was empower authorities. It was going to empower police officers to be able to categorize and assess what a hate crime is, right? And as much as that kind of data and that kind of narrative and how media reports on this is going to be so damn important, at the same time, we know how that actually plays out in the community. And we know how much of a wedge that's going to place between Asians and people of color, and specifically within the Black community, and what that's going to do to further drive us apart. And that part of the conversation, I felt, didn't happen enough when the drafting of this bill was happening.
Right. That's what I was thinking. That's
Right?
one main reason why representation matters,
Yes.
to craft
Yes.
this policy that works for the communities that it's meant to target, or to
Right.
help, rather.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Representation is just so much more than being able to carry our own identity, but it is exactly how you're going to champion us. Like,
Yeah.
do you actually understand who we are and what we care about, and how are you going to carry that to the state capitol or however you're representing us? But yes, I just could not agree more.
So what are your plans for the midterms?
Yeah, good question. So midterms for us, and I can't wait for y'all to like see some of our content. So again, I would love for everyone just to follow our stuff online at Run AAPI, because one thing that we are pushing this year is, and we know this, and I've kind of said this before, but culture moves 10 times faster than policy and politics does, right? It's like almost like two completely different systems, and yet they have to work together in order for us to move the needle, in order for us to see the kind of elected officials we want to see in office. And so for us to understand that culture moves faster, we have to understand that when it comes to digital engagement, online engagement, we have to change the game, right? And so that video that you saw, that content that you saw, Jen, in 2020, like that video went viral for a reason, because we have never seen that kind of stuff for young Asians before. Like we have cool shit, but like, why can't we see that in the political space? And so we
Yeah.
have this, I wish y'all could see this, but like an incredible network of creatives, all again, falling under the Asian diaspora, all that we work with our young Asian creators, that we have an entire influencer programming that we're running all throughout the year leading up to November 2022. And we're also running just killer content, and I kind of hate using that word content, but I use it so often here because we just don't have that for this demographic specifically. For my community specifically, I don't see cool shit for us young Asians, when it comes to, well, we need y'all to vote and this is how important it is to vote. And like, why can't it actually just reflect who we are and our interests? So a lot of our stuff is going to be very much in the digital space. And like I said, I'm really excited to finally kick off our influencer programming. These aren't like your influencers who, have like the millions of followers, but these are like Asian American influencers who, it might be like 50K, 100K followers, but they like know their people, and their audience, their niche audience, they are so compelled by very specific topics, very specific issues. And it's like that type of content creator that those are the people we want to partner with and collaborate with. They know their crew, they know their network, they know their power of their own community so much better than any of us do. So yeah, a lot of really good online stuff.
Yeah, that video is so cool. That's a badass video. Do you mind if I link to it? I know it's from 2020.
Do it.
Okay,
No,
I'll
I appreciate you.
I'll look for the new one when it comes out.
Yeah, I'll make sure you have it, Jen. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, the one in 2020, I can't even tell you how many messages and DMs we got of just like random young Asians who just like straight up said to us, like, I've never seen anything like this before. Like, holy shit, like that, like really gave me a moment of pause, or like, just like,
Yeah.
thank you for putting this together. And like, that's the kind of emotion we need to continue to spark. We do. If we're going to do the politics thing right, that's the kind of emotion politicians need to see and focus on.
Well, Lynn, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for all the work you've done. And also, come back and talk to me when it's closer to midterms, and we'll check in to see how we're all doing.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think we all got to check in at some point. I appreciate your time, though, Jen. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.